Yeah, I'm Simon, and I'm going to present the recommendations for policymakers evolving from our work package that is the data analysis branch, so to say. And today we're going to focus on a specific subset of policy recommendations for which I'm going to tell you the scientific background. These two, the policy recommendations are these two that you can see here. The first one being use monitoring to identify and actively support volunteer engagement. And the second one being be aware of side effects when using SDGs as a target criterion for CS activities. For now, we're going to focus on the first one here. And let me elaborate a bit more on this policy recommendation. So the recommendation is to use monitoring tools to be able to provide moderation support, which could be positive feedback and rewards to volunteers, but also to grant additional rights to highly engaged volunteers, for example. This could also be achieved by recruiting community managers who can be assigned to projects prepared in advance and then also themselves be provided with positive feedback and rewards, and which can take care of this engagement of the volunteers and to provide them with moderation support. The scientific background to this policy recommendation comes in part from a study that we did in our group last year, where the background basically is that on Zooniverse, it's a platform I guess most of you are familiar with. We do have a lot of contributory citizen science projects where they mainly annotate and classify data, and you could argue that the volunteers there are instrumentalized for these tasks. So the question we asked was, do volunteers actively participate in the scientific process in these projects? And if they do, what benefits do they get? And so our approach was to create a series of time-dependent graphs. So you can see how here on the right, how these graphs were created and evolved over time, and they basically depict the forum interactions in these citizen science projects. So they have a forum, and when the users discuss there, when they comment on each other, we create an edge gets created, and this leads to the creation of these networks. And what we can then analyze are the different user roles of the participating groups. We can also look at specific participation metrics, for example, how central users are over time, do they get more central, and also about the prevalence of certain user roles and role changes. Yeah, in these Zooniverse discussion forums, users can obtain roles, and these roles are visible in the forum, and they can also be they can also get promoted at some point, and then these roles change. I'm going to tell you something about that on the next slide, because our results were basically here on the graph on the top right, that we saw that only a tiny fraction of users, only really the top 5%, are responsible for most of the comments. So they are responsible for 70% of the total comments. And these users themselves are mainly volunteers and volunteer moderators. And volunteer moderators are those users who start as volunteers and then get promoted to a higher role. So they change their role. You can see here as well that these users, it's the orange user group, they increase their share over time. And knowing that they changed their role, it means they got assigned this new role by another moderator, for example, and they get assigned more privileges and more responsibilities in the forums. And this is also visible in their behavior. So if we consider the trajectories of individual users, for example, and if we know the time where they change their role, we see a change in their behavior. So here we see, for example, that the users stayed in the top ranks. So that means they are the top commenters in this time frame here. And this really changed after the role change, as well as the ratio of how they give help or comment other people and get comments from other people also changes. So before the role change, they received a lot of comments, and after the role change, they gave a lot of comments. So what we see here is that really the promotion to another user role, to a user role with more responsibilities, really leads to a change in behavior and leads to them being even more engaged. So this leads to the policy recommendation that we just saw. And moving on to the second policy recommendation, be aware of side effects when using SDGs as a target criterion for CS activities. This is about as I said, being aware of these side effects, because there might be research areas who might be left behind when we focus too strongly on SDGs and the resonance with SDGs, the association with SDGs alone. SDGs here refers to Sustainable Development Goals as defined by the UN. And examples for these research areas could be astronomy, astrophysics, arts and humanities, or ornithology. And the background to this is a study that we did in our group as well, where we analyzed project descriptions of citizen science projects, and we looked at the similarity of these project descriptions with a knowledge base, in this case Wikipedia, for these research areas and sustainable development goals. So that means that we know the similarity and we know which research areas are depicted in the project description of this project. So basically, which research areas can be assigned to this project. So then we ask the question, to what extent do research areas in project description resonate with SDGs? So our approach was to calculate the resonance of research areas in the project descriptions and SDGs in the project descriptions, and then look whether there's some overlap. We used the Jacquard similarity measure for this. For those interested, it's explained here in the top right. And what it tells us is that specifically these research areas where you would expect this, for example, environmental science and ecology, they resonate the most with SDGs. Here we used the resonance with all SDGs in percent. And for example, biodiversity conservation as well, they resonate with most of the SDGs. However, other research areas, for example, astronomy, astrophysics, they resonate not so much with SDGs, which means that if we, for example, orient towards SDGs as a sole criterion for the relevance of citizen science projects, this might not really reflect everything, and we should take care of this in our considerations. So, and this leads to this policy recommendation that we have here, that we should be aware of these side effects, because looking at those projects only from the SDG lens is not sufficient, because there might be other research areas which are also relevant, but do not resonate so much with SDGs. And this is